Our next founder interview is with Kenn Kelly, owner of digital marketing agency Never Settle. Kenn worked in big tech, but realized their values didn't align with his own. He had always dreamed of starting his own business, but was hesitant, especially after being just married and having a new bride to take care of. Despite having every reason to stay at his comfortable, high-paying job, Kenn took the leap and he quit to start his own marketing agency. In this interview, Kenn shares with us every step he took to build Never Settle into a multi-million-dollar business. Let's get to the interview. Cool. Kenn Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
My name's Kenn, and I'm the CEO of Never Settle, and my background was in management consulting, and then I ran a company in the Bay Area that was doing some SaaS work, and then ultimately came back here and started Never Settle as a creative tech and marketing agency back in 2012.
And what is Never Settle and what services do you offer?
We're a creative tech and marketing agency, and we basically help businesses grow through web technologies and marketing. And that could be anything from web or from branding to design to full stack web development, creative marketing campaigns, SEO, paid advertising, things like that.
What inspired you to start Never Settle, your business?
Yeah, I was in a tech startup that I was the CIO of, and there were some ways in which it was being run that didn't align with my own kind of personal values and beliefs, and got to a place where that tension was high enough where I felt like it would be best for me to resign and to do something else. And in that process, I was interviewing some of the bigger tech companies. I was thinking I was just going to work for, one of the kind of high growth startups at the time. And I was in a final interview, and it was in Boulder, Colorado. And it was at one of these, one of the big Silicon Valley like companies, one of their branches, and a really incredible opportunity in the job. And I'm walking through the cubicle farm, and I'm just like, my soul's like, I can't do this. Like this will destroy me. And so I was like, I'm going to start my own company. And that point was pretty risky, because it was 3 months before me and my wife were getting married. And I was resigning from a good job, and I finally had started making money that I invested in the startup, and like everything looked really good. And I was like, hey, I'm going to stop and I'm going to start from scratch again. Like, do you still want to, get married and trust that I can provide for you and stuff? So that was kind of the reason why I was coming out of different cultures that I had learned a lot from, but I didn't want to emulate for the rest of my life. So even in management consulting, Silicon Valley, like I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot, but working 100-hour weeks for years at a time. And then this newest company that I was part of, making some decisions that I didn't ethically agree with, was the genesis of like, what would it look like to never settle, and building a company that was built on, for us, it would be biblical values, but things that we think are beyond just bottom line that can make a difference.
So here you have this job. Maybe it's your dream job. You're making good money. It's going to be really hard to quit, but you need to make a change. So the way I have this interview set up is it'll be a section on how you built your business, the marketing, and then kind of personal insights about you. And so I'd like to start off with how you built this. So in the beginning, what core services did you begin with, and how did you decide on these services that you were first going to offer?
Well, when I started, it wasn't like I had a big plan in place. I was choosing to not be part of something anymore. And so most of client services was opportunistic of what can I do and what's available. Wasn't like, we're going to go change the world through this one thing. It was just like, the entire business was built around, how do I want to build a company? Like, so very little was about what are we going to do? What's our product? It was, how are we going to deliver that? And what would it look like to build a culture that the people in the team can thrive and they can be taken care of and they can have margin to invest in their communities? And so that's actually where I spent a ton of time in, I never put together a business plan, but I did put together like a deck of like, what am I building? And everything was about like, what kind of company and how are we going to attract great people and stuff. So that was, and I would preface that with, that's been the aim, and we've certainly fallen short in many, many ways, but that was always been the aim of what we're about. So, really interesting too about when you burn the ships, and you go all in, the universe has a way, or I believe God has a way of orchestrating things of, incredible divine nature. And so the day I handed in my resignation, I'm walking out of the office, I'm crapping my pants, what did I just do? And I get a call from a friend who I used to raise money with we'd done like a VC kind of roadshow and raised money for some organizations. And he goes, "Hey, Ken, I know you're in technology. I run this brand and we have these 40 sub brands under us. And we have a lot of need in web development and branding. Is that something you think you could do?" And I was like, it's kind of interesting. I was like, I no longer work for this company, but I'm starting my own thing. And I absolutely believe I could do that if you want to trust me. And so that was like my first client. And then it was basically what were their needs that aligned with skills and talents I already had. And then starting to build a team around that, which was mostly web development, design, and branding.
That is so cool. So just by sheer divine intervention, you basically got your first client.
Yeah. And it would be, I think we're going to talk about how like things that have worked or not worked for us, but that comes from previous relationships of investing in people and doing good work. And that's how it came around, right? So I'd done work with this guy in another capacity before and was successful. And so when something else came up that he knew was in my sphere, he reached out to me.
You got your first client just by divine intervention, sheer luck. At what point did you start scaling, and what strategies did you start implementing to see that growth?
Yeah, it was, we've always been kind of steady and consistent. So we've never had hyper growth. And part of that was based on the culture we want to build. So we want to build a legacy based company. And to do that, we can't burn through people. So we have to create an environment where they can be sustainable. With that, we also, that means we will likely not have hyper growth, right? So we've just kind of been probably 20 to 30% every year, just year over year. And in the beginning, those are small numbers, so maybe we made $150,000 our first year and you have 30% growth. Maybe our first couple of years was a little different because they're small numbers, but maybe after a few years, probably 20, 30%. But over time, it compounds, right? If you're in it for the long term, it can compound for you. So I think originally it was just, how do I find people that can do this service better than I can, and just great people. Is like, every project we do, we try to do great work so that we get a referral and that they remember. And really that's the baseline of our brand is never settle. So we want our brand to deliver what we promise, right? Just through our own name. And so we want to do good work. We know if we do good work, we'll get returning clients or they'll tell their friends. What I found was that cycle was probably somewhere between 5 to 7 years before it really kicked in, which was really interesting. But I kept telling my team, like, listen, like, we just do good work. They'll remember us. They'll tell their people. And what happens is just like, there's enough time needs to go by for a new project for someone to have. But once you have that pipeline, now the referrals we get are pretty consistent, right? But it was pretty mild for the first 5 to 7 years. But now that timeline has been built up and there's more volume. So finding great people that could do the work and then completing the work in a way that would create a referral cycle. I think for growth, it's always been the people have been really challenging. And then probably around that 7-year mark, I also realized that my Field of Dreams, that movie, like if you build it, they will. And I had that dream kind of crushed. I was like, man, we're doing great work, but we're not just getting all this business. I was like, I need to market my own business. And you hear people talk about this all the time. I've read easily over 100 books that talk about it. And it's fascinating to me how hard it is for me to implement the knowledge that I've learned, right? Like, wisdom would be the application of knowledge. So it's like, I learned all this stuff, but I was never investing in my own marketing and branding. And when I started doing that and actually proactively trying to get our brand out there and get awards and get reviews and just things that would generate business, that's where we probably started seeing pretty significant growth.
Awesome. And so I'd like to hit on that a little bit more on attracting the customers that you did after that first one. What were some of those tactics that helped you keep them? And then I think you mentioned this, you talked about this already about retaining them and doing great work for them, but how did you attract these customers and retain them?
Yeah. In the very beginning, it was just my own network, right? Of just people, and letting people know what I was doing without being salesy, just letting them know, and then trying to make it right. So if we made a mistake, I can't tell you how much money we've given back to our clients over the years, but I know it makes a huge difference. And I know for myself, I feel like customer service is almost like this like lost virtue in Western culture in a lot of places. And I grew up, both my parents, blue collar workers. I grew up in a restaurant. I worked in the service industry my whole life up until like post college, but service was everything. There was always like a pride or just like something that meant worthwhile. Like, man, I can provide good service, even if I'm just serving a meal. And I feel like that's been lost. And so I ask my customers a lot, like one of the hardest questions and best questions I ask if a project or something goes sideways is, what would it take to make this right? And that question is really risky because they might say, give me back all my money and, like whatever. But what I found is if you approach people with a sincere heart and you're willing to kind of meet them somewhere to try to make it right, people aren't greedy and they don't ask for, they typically ask for something that is pretty reasonable, and it costs. Like it doesn't come without costs, But what I found is those people stay with us for the long haul because they know, like, hey, part of business, part of life, like mistakes are going to happen. And I want to be with a partner that's willing to kind of like,
I can vouch for that with my experience doing anything, right? Like the customer service on so many things. And I think, people on the internet look at their maybe competitors when they're building something and go, oh, there's so many competitors. But with good customer service, I mean, you can beat out so many businesses, so many people.
Yeah. And part of it's quality too, right? You can't just be a nice guy or a nice woman. You got to deliver. So if you're going to sell something, you got to deliver what you're going to sell, but then you have to service it really well.
How do you differentiate Never Settle from other agencies in a crowded market? And I think, again, you've already hit on this a little bit with your customer service.
Yeah, I think the things that are different about us, one, our internal culture is probably a little bit different. I would say our team is pretty vocal after they join to typically be like, man, I've never worked in a company like this. And we're certainly not the only ones, but I don't think that the way we run our company is like most companies. So we pay a lot of our people salaries, but we limit their weeks to 40-hour work weeks. But we also ask them to work a full 40. So we're just like, we want that 40 to be focused and to be intentional, but we're going to pay you for your full salary and we're not going to ask for overtime ever. And so you can have margin and time to invest in your family. And there's just a lot of things like that, like our 40-hour work week cap, that I think internally makes Never Settle a different place to work. Now, when we look at what differentiates us from our competitors and what we can provide, I think one of the things is a lot of agencies are either like really heavy on the creative side or really heavy on the tech side. And I'd say there are probably a lot fewer that actually are really heavy on the tech side. There's not a ton of competition there. And we're both. So we have this like full creative team, and then we have full stack engineers, and everything's internal. So we don't outsource any work. So our creatives can come up with an incredible campaign to build some e-commerce funnel, and our guys can develop it. And they could, the app, the backend software for the company and the website or whatever that may be. So that's probably one thing, is that we're full stack and creative. The second thing is like myself and partners have launched, I think, 5 businesses through Never Settle, sub companies that we've either sold or whatever. And so we know what it's like to run an e-commerce store. We know what it's like to do international fulfillment. We know what it's like to, we have been our own client as the agency. And so I think when we provide solutions and we're doing consulting up front, we're not just thinking, if someone comes to us as an example, they're like, hey, I just want an e-commerce site for my product. When we start looking at that project, we're thinking about what are all the ways that we can save time and cost on the back end for them managing their inventory and doing reporting, and what analytics do they need to get so that they can make better business decisions on what marketing is working, versus just being like, we're going to build this website, we're going to build this creative campaign. We're kind of thinking through operations beginning to end. And I don't think a lot of agencies have that experience. And then as clients, we've probably launched somewhere between 40 to 50 like new brands where people have come to us, like almost like we're an incubator. I have this idea, I have funding, I want to raise this app. And we've gone that whole process with them. So I think we have a really good understanding of like the ways that the business is impacted outside of just the service they're asking for us.
Oh, that is so cool. That is so cool to understand your customer and then on top have that customer service to bring it all kind of full circle.
Yeah. I think it all lives and dies on those two things. Like, does the customer feel seen, known, and taken care of? And then ultimately, do they get the return on their investment, right? And the bigger clients you win and the bigger projects you win, the more money that's at stake, that you have to deliver the quality. Like that, there's a really high bar. If someone's going to spend a significant amount of money, they need to get it back, right? Whereas small budgets, there's a little bit more leeway.
So you talked about when you first started out and how you were building your team slowly to find the great people that you needed and to build the business that you envisioned. When you were hiring, how were you finding these great people? What did you see in them to go, okay, that would be a perfect fit for the business I want to create?
How we found them feels like like relationships and then people just applying, like random people applying. And my guess is that at least a third of our workforce has come to us, applied for a job that we did not have, and we figured out a way to bring them on because we're like, this is an incredible person. And I feel like talent is one of the most sacred things to find in business. So even our managers right now, a few of our managers that came in a couple of years ago, like, well, we don't have a job, so we're just going to ignore this. And I was like, no, 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 no. If like we want to vet people because people are the hardest to find. And if we can find someone that's incredible, likely we can be creative and find a way to get them in, even if it's not right away. And we're honest with it. Hey, we don't have a job right now. Really interested in you. You know, are you flexible in these areas? And then we start thinking, can we sell more work into that? So, but how we found them has been pretty organic. And then what we look for, we're a remote company, so we're a remote culture. And so I look for really strong communication skills and the ability not to miss details. It may seem, like something really small, but even in an email, if we ask 5 questions and they answer 4 of them, that cycle, especially with people in different time zones, we could lose a whole day. And when that comes into client work, those little things really start adding up. So I just look for, can people communicate really well? And are they detail oriented? And I think there's a lot of things we look for in all the other skills, but those 2 things are pretty important. And even in my email, like if someone applies and then we're talking through email, I will intentionally ask multiple questions in various forms and not all of it organized as a test to see if they could do it. And I do not communicate like that once they're hired, but it's just trying to see like, hey, you're going to get communication from clients that will be all over the place. Are you able to handle that? Or if one of us doesn't do it the best, like, are you on the other side where you can pick that up without dropping a ball?
Perfect. So the last thing I want to hit on kind of how you grew your business is referrals. And you mentioned this earlier. How big have referrals been for building your business?
My guess, I should have looked before, but probably 40% of our lifetime revenue is from referrals. And how I track a referral is if a client, and referrals would also come from like my team and myself. So those would track as referrals as well. But if one of my teammates, they bring in a big client, let's say they bring in Google and Google's not our client. So it's just a fictional example. They bring them in. If Google does $10 million of revenue with us over the next decade, that will all be traced to that one referral source. Cause it's like, once they're in, the rest of the team is the one that's keeping them and maintaining them. But I'm still trying to find out where's our original entry point. And then I can make better marketing decisions on that. But I would say probably 40% of all of our business is from referral. But a lot of that, the bulk of that revenue is from recurring or from multiple projects with clients that we've had long-term relationships with. So that's not just first touch revenue.
Oh, that is amazing. So it really shows what the customer side of things, doing the good work, making them satisfied, what that does for a business. So moving on to the next section, when a client comes in to you to do marketing, what are the first steps that you take to understand and identify their goals?
I think trying to put ourselves in a place of humility. So we've done over 1,500 projects at this point, and a lot of stuff starts to feel similar. And at the same time, every business, even if they're direct competitors, is very different. And in some ways, that business owner or the leader who's hired us to do the project, they have a vision and they also have an internal view of the landscape of what they're trying to do that we'll never have. And so trying to be really curious to understand what's the problem they're trying to solve and how they're trying to solve it, and what ways can we bring industry experience to partner with and help them achieve what they're doing. So let's say discovery and curiosity are the really big things we want to start with.
Perfect. And so how do you determine the right channels for a client's message? For instance, like whether you're using social media, SEO marketing, or is it kind of like a all-encompassing sort of thing?
Again, I think it's that discovery, looking at their industry, and then budget is a big thing, and then opportunity. So especially on, non-enterprise level clients, people are working within very limited budgets. So the first thing is to say, what's going to provide, like we could do these 10 things. Which one's actually going to have the highest return on investment? And that answer is pretty different every time, depending on the brand. Social and specific social channels may work really well. And as an example, advertising on X is very, very different. Like market in X is very different than the market on LinkedIn, which is very different than the market that's on Pinterest, right? Those are like the demographics and the usage of those are very different. So finding the right channels for them but starting with like, what has the highest opportunity for them? Because very rarely do people say, hey, you tell me what I need to do and we'll do it.
I love asking this question to marketing professionals because depending on circumstances or whatever, you can have those clients that are kind of finicky. How do you make sure the client's expectations are being met without, because obviously you guys are the pros, you guys have been doing this a long time, but they might have their own vision of the way things should be going. So how do you kind of communicate that?
Yeah, it's missed most times, right? And that's the dynamic of human communication, especially in remote culture where most of our communication with them is video calls or emails or Slack, whatever that may be. The things that have been most beneficial to us is getting crystal clear on the deliverables. So it's in the scoping phase, the more that we can be specific about what we're doing and then have a conversation saying, okay, when this is what we're hearing you say, this is what it means, this is what we're doing. Even in the best scoping project, there's always a difference at the end. It's like, well, I thought that happened, so that you have to account for that. But I think the more work you can do up front, the better. The challenge with that is that's time and money. People don't always want to pay for that. And you also may not want to pay for that or can afford to just have your team working on that. So there's like this tension of the more we do up front, the less problems will happen in the end. But we don't have all the money in the world to do that for free. And clients don't always want to pay all of that, right? Bigger clients understand, and they understand that they'll win better because we're scoping the right things. But I think getting that clarity up front. And then one of the things that have been a game changer for us in the last year or so is just really frequent communication that's distilled. And we kind of have like just our own standard operating procedure of like, we're going to show the clients like we did this, and this. Here's what's in progress. Here's our roadblocks. Here's how many hours we spent. And that frequent, consistent communication that's templated, it gives them something to kind of, it's like this heavy box and it puts handles on the box and they can kind of get their minds around it. And that allows us to pivot way quicker because we're showing progress and we're all on the same page versus what typically without that, what would happen is you go down the wrong path. You don't realize it till the deliverables done. They say, hey, I thought this happened, right? So that being able to provide transparency early on, I think has helped us a lot It's helped us prevent misunderstandings or that client frustration because we can make small adjustments along the way versus like hitting a wall and having to rebuild something.
That's such a great idea, that templated way of doing things. Yeah, I bet that helps a lot. So moving toward kind of the ending of the interview and personal insights / mindset questions. You mentioned growing significantly over the last few years. And I think this kind of a loaded question because I think you mentioned so many different things that have helped here, but I'm going to ask this anyway. What do you believe were some key factors that allowed you to scale effectively?
Yeah. And again, scaling has just been probably 20 to 30% consistently. It's just as that number gets bigger, that 20% starts to mean a lot more. And quality of work is huge. And then the other thing is getting ourselves in public spaces. So that would be awards, being willing to go get awards, getting high rankings in directories or expert certifications. As an example, WooCommerce is, more sites are built on WordPress and WooCommerce than by a significant degree. I think it's like 40% of the internet's e-commerce is built there. They have different rankings based on type of work you've done and different certifications. And we're at like the platinum level. I think there's less than 20 agencies global at that level, and you can't go any higher. That exposure, somebody's going to WooCommerce and they're saying, hey, I want to find someone that can work on our site. That exposure and where they're like, who's the best of the best? That's really helpful. So I think getting us in directories and awards has been really, really helpful. And that was the big change that took me maybe 7 years to learn that lesson, but to be like, oh, we got to go market our business. Like, they're not just going to come. Like if we build it, they will not come just because it's awesome, right? Like they will tell their friends, but if we really want to grow, we need to be in public spaces. We need to be competing. Like where are people searching for business? It's review sites and directories and things like that.
That might actually answer my next question too, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So like when you look back, what would you say is the most crucial decision that was contribution to your success? Was it that, or do you think maybe multiple things?
Man, in any ways that I've had success, I would actually put it back to like my personal disciplines and like the things that have changed me have been the things that have made me a better leader or a better businessman. And that's like all the things that I do when no one's looking. So I know it's not directly answering that question. So from a marketing standpoint, awards and ranking in directories, those for sure, like that's easy. That is the number one way for us that we've been able to generate inbound leads or the most profitable inbound leads. But when you say, to your success or to never settle success, to me, all of it hinges on what I'm doing when no one's looking. So like the ways that I take care of my mind, body, soul, like I take a cold shower every single day, and I hate it. And it's great for me. And I spend time journaling and breath work and reading my Bible and working out 6 days a week and shutting down work at the end of the day and not looking at it till the next day so I can be present with my family. All those like little habits that I do consistently over decades, I feel like those are the things that have actually made the biggest difference in our success.
I'd like to hit on that a little bit more too. And you've just named some things that have helped you education wise. And you referred earlier to, you've read tons and tons of books on different material. What type of education has really, whether that's books, seminars, what education has really helped you build a stronger mindset?
I was just thinking like, it's funny because I got my bachelor's degree, but no one in my family had ever gone to college. And even like my parents barely got through high school, and they're incredible, incredible people. And education has been super influential, and I've read a lot. But when you talk about what's changed my mindset, it's been diving into things on modern day philosophy. So taking ancient philosophies of what it meant to live a virtuous life and studying those. And there's two things I've been part of. One was called Optimize with a guy named Brian Johnson. He's now, it's a huge startup, and they run a app called Heroic. And I was in their coaching program for years and got a ton of benefit out of that. And now I'm in a community of people that are like me that like to do hard things. And it's called Men and Women of Discomfort. And we all get to show up every day and do these hard things in community with transparency around what we're doing to be held accountable to the things that we set ourselves up to do.
Can you hit a little bit more on you learning philosophy? What books and education there have you found most? Have you taken most out of?
Yeah, the Heroic and the program, I think they do a really good job of cultivating hundreds and hundreds of books. I would say Ryan Holiday is kind of your modern day philosopher. Brian Johnson is a guy that's like culminating all of that together. And then that self-reflection, right? So in journaling, like, what is it to live a virtuous life? What are the actions I need to do today to show up courageously or to love wholeheartedly, or that self-reflection and sitting in time, like what actions do I need to accomplish to do that? And I think a lot of philosophy is just about living a virtuous life. It's living on virtue, not like metrics. So and then if you ask, what would it take to do that? You can kind of get your own answer. So you can kind of become your own little philosopher. And then you have to have a way to measure it and track it, right? So just like running the agency, like I have my own kind of analytics. Like I check, like, do I take a cold shower every day? It's like, checking it off, and then looking at the ways, how did my heart rate variability impact based on what I ate and slept? So a constant feedback loop. I think you can become your own little philosopher.
Beautiful. There's a question I like to ask every entrepreneur I meet. I think it brings a lot of context to, how you got to where you are today. And that question is, what was your childhood like? Did you always want to own your own business, even from a young age?
I think I was fascinated by it. And I knew I wanted to build something. I never thought like I want to build this big business, but my dad, he had started his own mechanic shop. My mom had started her own little restaurant. And so it was kind of in my blood. And I know that as a little kid, I think my first business was like, I did all this work. I saved up some money and I built this like trailer, and I bought a lawnmower, and then I pulled it on my bike and was like trying to start my own lawnmower business. And I didn't do very well. I was always a great worker, but I wasn't a great marketer, which is interesting because you learn from those places where you fail, right? And now hopefully I'm a much better marketer because we have businesses that trust us and we've been able to see some really cool things happen. But by the time I got to college, like I knew I wanted to start my own business, and I had a really wise professor. His name is Bill Schuster, and an incredible man. And he said, hey, you should, I finished really well. So I barely got out of, this is kind of a side topic, but I graduated high school with a 1.7 GPA, like barely made it through, which is like a D average. Like that's really bad. And I got in on academic probation, and then I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Business, and I graduated magna cum laude and did straight A's. And I ended up getting a handful of offers, and I was talking to this guy, Bill Schuster, and like, hey, I don't want to, like, these sound like awesome jobs, but I just want to start my own company. And he was just like, hey, you have a lot to learn. You would be super wise if you were to go to one of these big companies. And I went into management consulting, cut your teeth and just learn. Just spend a few years learning, and at any time you can quit and you can start your own business. But you can't go learn things that you don't know. And so I heeded his advice and did that. And then eventually it didn't look quite like me starting my own company. Like I left management consulting and came on as a partner of a high growth tech startup in the Bay, and then was partners in other things to eventually start Never Settle.
What advice would you give to someone looking to start their own business?
I think the most important thing is like to not let fear paralyze you. I think most people actually know what they want to do and they're unwilling to burn the ships. But when you burn the ships and you're on Normandy, like there's no going back, and that gives you all the momentum and energy you need to do. But I think most people are just kind of unwilling to go all in with that. And all in doesn't mean, like me, doesn't mean you have to quit. Maybe you're doing something at night, but I think most people actually know in their heart what they want to do. And there's fear, probably a lot of things, most likely failure, that holds them back. And the truth is like once you step into it, you're typically going to be pretty successful, but you gotta make that first step. So I would say that's the most important thing.
You gotta start. Yep. And finally, where can people find more about you and your business?
Yeah, our site's probably the best place. So that's just neversettle.
Awesome, Kenn Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us. It was fantastic talking to you. And I've learned so much from this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Corey. It was a lot of fun.